This is Sarah. She's just like many of us, someone who craves the quiet of the outdoors to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. A weekend getaway in the woods, she thought, would be the perfect way to unwind. No phones, no distractions, just the sounds of nature. The kind of peace you can only find in a place like this. She steps into the cabin, eager to leave the noise of her busy life behind. The walls, the floors, the faint smell of wood and dust, it all felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for her. She unpacks her bags, sets her things down, and makes herself at home. The soft hum of the fridge running in the background is the only sound in the house. But then, something changed. The quiet wasn't as comforting as she thought. The lights flickered overhead and the air in the room grew heavy, thick. It wasn't cold, not really, but there was a presence, an unsettling presence filling the space. And for a brief moment, Sarah froze. A chill ran down her spine as her eyes scanned the room, looking for the source of the feeling she couldn't quite place. She brushed it off. It was just the storm outside. Or maybe the old cabin settling under the weight of the years. But as the minutes passed, the strange feeling lingered, tightening around her like a hand slowly closing into a fist. She sits down to relax, but even in the comfort of the armchair, her thoughts wander. She can't shake the feeling that something is off. The air smells different, thick, almost as if it's been trapped in here for too long. Every sound seems to echo in the silence like a whisper just beyond her reach. She opens the window, cautiously, her breath shallow. There's nothing. Just the howling wind, the dark forest stretching as far as the eye can see. But why did it feel like she wasn't alone? She quickly closes the window and locks it. The wind picks up outside, but something else is there too, something more dark. A subtle shift in the air, the kind of thing you can't see but feel. Something watching. As the hours dragged on, Sarah tried to shake the feeling, but she couldn't. The sounds continued, the creaking, the whispering, the feeling of being watched, and with every noise, the house seemed to shrink around her. What started as a simple escape had become something far more unnerving. But who or what was really out there? And just when she thought she was alone, the house gave its answer. The night had dragged on, each passing minute heavier than the last. Sarah sat in the living room, clutching her phone, as the storm outside intensified. Her eyes flickered back and forth between the window and the dimly lit room, the silence growing oppressive. Then, without warning, it happened. The entire house plunged into darkness. No lights, no sound, nothing. Just the oppressive blackness that surrounded her. The kind of darkness where you lose all sense of time, where every noise, no matter how small, feels amplified. It was as if the world outside had vanished, leaving her trapped in a vacuum of fear. Sarah jumped, her pulse quickening. She fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, but it only seemed to make things worse. Shadows that had been nothing more than shapes in the corners of her vision now became figures, moving, watching. Panic crept in. Her mind raced, trying to piece together some logical explanation. A power outage, maybe? But the storm was distant. Why had everything gone dark so suddenly? She pulled at her clothes, wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans. Her breath was erratic. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to move, but her body refused. The stillness in the air felt thick, heavy. She had to find out what was going on. She forced herself to her feet, her flashlight beam darting through the house. There was something she needed to check. Something wasn't right. She moved toward the hallway, her eyes scanning the edges of the rooms. The beam of light shook slightly as she reached the door. A flicker caught her eye. Something darted across the hallway, too fast to catch. But when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it just her imagination? Or had she seen something? A shadow, perhaps? It was impossible to tell. The house was playing tricks on her mind. She couldn't be sure anymore. But that wasn't the only strange thing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They were coming from upstairs, just above her head. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She stood frozen, listening intently to the sound that seemed to be coming toward her. Step by step, closer, closer, until she didn't want to look. She knew that whatever was upstairs wasn't something she wanted to meet. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, forced her feet forward, one step at a time. As the seconds dragged on, the house seemed to close in around her. The shadows more oppressive, the air thick with an electric charge she couldn't explain. Sarah felt something pulling her toward the stairs. She had to see. She had to know what was happening. But with every step, the house seemed to grow colder, and the air more oppressive. And just when she reached the bottom of the stairs, a shadow moved past her, a figure, moving so quickly it was impossible to catch. There was no escaping now. The house wasn't empty. And whatever was watching her, whatever was moving just beyond the edge of the light, was closer than she ever thought possible. The silence was shattered when Sarah heard it, an unmistakable sound. The front door, which she had clearly locked earlier, creaked open slowly. She froze in place, staring at it as the wind from outside howled through the crack. No one was supposed to be out there. She hadn't heard anyone approach. She hadn't even heard the wind pick up this much. But there it was, the door, wide open, as if inviting someone or something inside. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. The air seemed to grow even colder as she walked cautiously toward the door. Each step she took felt like a trap, every sound magnified, every breath too loud. When she reached the door, her hand hovered over the handle, shaking, unsure if she should open it. But as her fingers brushed against the cold metal, the door slammed shut on its own. But it wasn't just the door. The lights began to flicker again, the bulbs dimming and brightening in an erratic pattern. Every time the light flashed back on, it seemed like something was different. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched unnaturally long, as though they were waiting, watching. The room felt like it was alive, like it was reacting to her presence. Each flicker of light brought new horrors, new shapes that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Sarah's heart raced as she stepped back, retreating into the hallway. Her pulse quickened as the house seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing down, suffocating her. And then a loud crash came from upstairs. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands, but her mind raced. The crash had come from upstairs, from the very place where she had heard those footsteps earlier. Something or someone was up there. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears, but there was no turning back now. She had to go up there. She had to see what was happening. Slowly, she ascended the stairs, the old wood creaking under her weight. Every step was a reminder of how alone she truly was, and how everything she thought she knew about this place was now slipping away. As she reached the top of the stairs, Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the hallway. It landed on the door to a room she didn't remember seeing before. A room that had always been locked, at least. That's what she thought. But now the door was wide open. The faint smell of dust and mildew filled the air, the room darker than the rest of the house. Sarah's hand trembled as she moved toward the open door, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Something wasn't right. She had never seen this room before. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under her weight. Her eyes scanned the room. The walls were lined with dust and cobwebs, but what caught her attention was something on the floor, footprints in the dust. But she hadn't been in this room. No one had. She didn't know whether to run or keep moving forward. But the footprints, they led deeper into the room toward a corner she hadn't noticed before. A shadow seemed to linger there, shifting in the darkness. Sarah stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. A cold chill ran through her body as the whispers grew louder. Her mind screamed for her to turn around, but her feet wouldn't move. She was trapped in the house, trapped with whatever it was that was waiting for her in the dark. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest as she stood in the dark room, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The door had slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in the empty house, and the footsteps she had heard earlier now seemed to be following her. She rushed toward the door, her hand fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. She tried again, desperation creeping in, but it remained stubbornly closed. Panic began to take hold of her. She was trapped. She was trapped in a house that had turned into a maze of shadows and whispers. The windows, she hadn't even thought to check the windows. Maybe there was still a way out, a way to escape. She turned toward them, her flashlight cutting through the air, but the glass wouldn't open either. It was as if the house itself had sealed her in. She stepped back, her pulse racing faster than ever. It was as if the house had become its own living entity, shutting her out, keeping her inside, forcing her to face whatever it was that had been stalking her all along. The air grew heavier still, and Sarah could feel that something was in the room with her now, something watching her. She wasn't alone anymore. The whispers, soft at first, began to grow louder, more distinct, as if someone was standing right behind her. Sarah spun around, her eyes wide, searching the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the shadows. Just the suffocating silence. And then it came. A voice. Barely audible but unmistakable. It whispered, "Get out." Her body went cold. She could feel the presence now, its weight in the room. She wasn't imagining it, something was there. Something had been there all along. The whispers had been just the beginning. The house had a life of its own, and it was waking up, feeding on her fear. She tried to breathe, to focus, to keep her mind steady. But it was impossible. The air was thick, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Her breath quickened, her chest tightening as she turned in circles, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no sense to be found. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the shadows were alive, moving, shifting around her. Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation, but there was none. The house, the whispers, the shadows, they weren't just figments of her imagination. They were real, and they were waiting for her to make a move. But before she could even take another step, the door creaked open, just slightly, enough for her to see the hallway beyond. The darkness seemed to pull at her, drawing her in, inviting her to step out and face whatever waited in the unknown. The door to the hallway creaked open, and Sarah, trembling with fear, hesitated for just a moment before stepping through. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn and run, but her legs felt like lead. The house had a grip on her now, its presence suffocating, and there was nowhere left to hide. She stepped into the hallway, the faint glow from her flashlight casting long shadows along the walls. As she moved down the hallway, the house seemed to pulse around her. The walls groaned and shifted, as though something was awakening from within. The air grew thicker, almost as if it was wrapping itself around her body, making it hard to breathe. She reached the end of the hall and found a small old wooden door that she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her to open it. In the room, there was an old wooden desk, cluttered with papers and a few dusty objects. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, landing on a small, weathered diary tucked between two old books. The edges of the pages were yellowed, the leather cover cracked and worn. It was almost as if it had been waiting for her to find it. As Sarah flipped through the pages, the words written inside seemed to blur and shift in the flickering light. The handwriting was frantic, almost desperate. She read aloud the words that stood out the most, her voice shaking with disbelief. "The family has gone mad. They are trapped here, just like us. They came for us in the night, and now they are here, waiting for us to join them. There is no escape. There is only the darkness." Sarah's voice faltered as she read those last words, the realization dawning on her like a tidal wave. The house wasn't just a place of terror. It was a prison that had been waiting for someone like her, someone who was foolish enough to stay after the blackout. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. The whispers turned into screams. The walls seemed to close in on her, pushing her toward the center of the room. The darkness was alive, and it was pulling her in. Something was coming for her. Something had been waiting for her. And now that she knew the truth, there was no way out. The family who had once lived in this house had been trapped, just like Sarah. And now they were here, calling her, pulling her deeper into the shadows. She had uncovered the truth, but it was too late to escape. The house had claimed its next victim, and Sarah's fate was sealed. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts scrambling for any sort of solution. She couldn't stay in the room any longer. The house was closing in on her, the shadows alive, suffocating her with every breath she took. The whispers, now unmistakably angry, filled the air, shouting, demanding her to stay, to accept her fate. But Sarah refused. She wouldn't let this place claim her like it had claimed so many before. In a flash of desperation, Sarah bolted for the door, her eyes darting around the room, searching for something, anything to help her escape. She needed to leave. She needed to outrun whatever was hunting her. As her hands reached the door, she froze. The same low, distorted voice she had heard earlier, the one that whispered, "Get out," now echoed through the room, louder and more menacing. It was everywhere inside her head, surrounding her, pressing down on her chest. With a trembling hand, she gripped the knife, ready to fight, ready to defend herself against the entity she knew was closing in on her. But deep down, she knew it was futile. No weapon could fight against the darkness that surrounded her. No matter how much she fought, it would never be enough. She threw open the door, her body slamming against it in her haste to escape. The air outside, thick with the remnants of the storm, hit her like a slap to the face. But she didn't hesitate. She ran, her feet pounding against the floorboards, each step faster than the last. The door slammed shut behind her. But that didn't stop her. She needed to get out. She had to get away from this place, from whatever was chasing her. As Sarah ran toward the exit, she thought she was free, thought she had finally escaped the nightmare. But just as she reached the door, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Footsteps too heavy, too deliberate to be her own. Her pulse raced, and her body locked in place, paralyzed with fear. She didn't turn around, but the footsteps grew closer, the sound of them now following her every move. It was too late. She couldn't outrun it. The darkness had caught up with her, and there was nowhere left to go. And just as she thought she would be consumed by the darkness, she was gone. Vanished. The house, now empty, fell silent once more, as if nothing had happened at all. The storm outside had stopped. The whispers had ceased. But Sarah was no longer there. But the house remains. And though Sarah is gone, her story, like the others before her, has become part of the darkness that lingers within these walls. The house was silent now. The storm had passed, and the wind had died down to nothing but a faint whisper. The walls, which had once groaned with the weight of the supernatural, now stood still, lifeless, as if nothing had ever happened. But there was something lingering in the air. A presence, a feeling that hadn't quite disappeared. And just when it seemed like Sarah was finally free, the lights flickered on one last time. But this time, something was different. Something horrifying. The room that had been left empty moments ago was no longer empty. The entity wasn't gone. It never left. It had only been waiting for the right moment to return, to make itself known once more. And now it was calling to anyone who dared to listen. The house still has its secrets, and no one who steps inside will ever leave the same way they came in. The story's not over. There are still things hidden in the shadows, things waiting for you. What do you think happened next? And if you're brave enough for more, if you dare to uncover the truth of what lies hidden in the darkness, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this house, it's far from finished with you. The house is waiting. And so are the secrets it keeps, waiting for you to find them.